Today's lesson is lesson 69, found on page 463. The topic today is direct variation. The direct variation formula is given to us as y equals k times x, where x and y are variables, and k is called the constant of variation. This equation is extremely similar to the slope-intercept form, with exception to the intercept that was to the side of this equation. We have two variables in the equation, one of which is x. This is our independent variable. The y is the dependent variable. Let me give you a few practical examples of what a direct variation is. If I'm working at a job and I make $10 an hour, it depends on how many hours I work to how much money that I make. If I'm working $10 an hour, then the equation would be 10 times x to find y. So if I work for 2 hours, then I've made $20. And if I've worked for 3 hours, then I've made $30. And if I've worked for 4 hours, then I've made $40. The amount of money that I make varies directly with how many hours I work. The more hours I work, the more money I make. It depends on how many hours I work as to how much money I make. That's why this one is independent and this one is dependent. Another real life example is if I'm traveling in a car at a steady distance of 60 miles per hour, then I'm looking at the equation distance equals rate times time, where the rate would be a constant of 60 miles per hour. It would all depend on how much time I took to travel, of how much distance I would cover, going at a constant rate of 60 miles per hour. If I traveled 1 hour, then I would cover 60 miles. If I traveled 2 hours, then I would cover 120 miles. If I traveled 3 hours, I would cover 180 miles, and so on. It would depend on how much time I traveled to how much distance I covered. The t in this equation is my independent variable, and the d is my dependent variable, because the distance depends on how much time I've spent traveling. Another example is the perimeter of a triangle. The perimeter of a triangle, if I have an equilateral triangle that has a side length of 3, the perimeter depends on what the side length is. So if the side length is 3, then the perimeter of an equilateral triangle would be 9. Here we would have the sides of the triangle, and here we would have the perimeter. If the side is 3, then the perimeter is 9. Well, how about if the sides are 8? If the sides are 8, then the perimeter is 24. Another example of direct variation. What we're doing in a direct variation is we're multiplying. We're taking one variable and multiplying it by the same number over and over again. That's why it's called a constant. It does not change. When we're graphing a direct variation on our XY coordinate system, it's always going to start at the origin. Y equals 2x looks like this. If x equals 0, y equals 0, it's always going to go through the origin. If x equals 1, y equals 2. Go over 1 and up 2 and put another point. If x is 2, y is equal to 4. If x is 2, y is 4, and there's a point that represents that. If x is negative 1, y is a negative 2. So in the negative, 1, and then down, 1, 2. And notice how the points connect to make a line. Your direct variation will always go through the origin. First thing to keep in mind, the direct variation always goes through the origin. Second thing to keep in mind is that when we're looking at the direct variation, we always have one variable which is independent and the other variable which is dependent. Independent variable, dependent variable. Now let's take a look at the examples for today's lesson.